Well, this, I think, is my lucky day. I'm a rhubarb and custard freak, and I think mine must be just about ready now. Rhubarb, of course, is the first fruit that you'll get out of the garden, so it's worth growing just for that. And I've had this forcer over a plant since last February, and I reckon it's going to be about ready. Yes, it is. Just look at that. And what's more, that will be the sweetest, tenderest rhubarb that you've ever tasted. Now, a beautiful terracotta forcer like this will cost over £50, I'm afraid. But, of course, you can do exactly the same thing just with a small plastic dustbin. So, it looks like rhubarb and custard for me tonight. But, of course, first of all, I've got to sing for my supper. And later on today, I'll be planting some hedging. It's worth taking a lot of trouble over this job, and particularly with your choice of plants. Do we go for the very fast-growing but problematic Leylandi, or do we look at something else? Well, I'll be looking at some alternatives later on, but first of all, an update on the ornamental kitchen garden. With the spring flowers looking so cheerful, and now I've got some vegetables planted, you can begin to see the idea of the ornamental kitchen garden. The vegetables here grow in amongst the flowers, and they look really good. But you grow them in patches rather than in long straight rows. I've got some little multiple-seeded onions here, and my peas I plant in a circle, and they'll grow up these prunings that I've saved specially from the garden. In the front here, I'm growing some summer cauliflowers. Now, they are certainly the most difficult of all vegetables to grow. And the secret with those is that once you start them growing, you've got to keep them growing steadily. Otherwise, they'll run to seed or form small curds. Never let them get to a stage like this, for example, where here you can see the leaves have gone hard and red and starved because they've been in the box too long. Much better to plant them out at this stage where the plants are smaller and the leaves nice and fresh and green. Well, I've still got some spaces in the border down here, and I'm going to fill those with hardy annuals. And you may remember that I sowed some hardy annuals at the beginning of March in these little plastic modules. Now, these are growing in coconut fibre compost, and they've produced some nice little root systems. But it's essential with these modules to plant them out moist. If that compost is dry, then the roots tend to stay in the compost and won't get out, and that will set them back. So before you plant them, give them a really good soaking. Now, these are Limnanthes douglasii. That's the poached eggplant, and they'll look great in the front of the border here because they'll spill over the edge of this path, and they've got lovely yellow and white flowers, and there's an added bonus too because they attract hoverflies, and of course hoverfly larvae eat greenfly by the million. There are no pesticides used in this garden at all. Now, those are flowering in the summer, but for spring bedding I'm using some primulas there and pansies. Those pansies, I think, are very good value because they've been in flower for a long time, and I've got a brand new variety in a tub on my patio. In fact, this variety is so new that it hasn't even got a name yet. You can probably see that the flowers here are slightly smaller than the normal winter pansies, but there are many more of them, so you in fact get a much better show, and for a longer period too. Now, you can be amongst the first to grow these by taking advantage of an offer in the May issue of the BBC Gardener's World magazine, and you can enter a competition to give it a name and win yourself a shredder.
Dear Gardener's World, can you spend more time in this series with the problems of gardeners who slave away and lavish time and effort on projects only to find that they end in disaster? My problem is my lawn. Well, it's grass really. After raking, weeding, feeding and mowing and edging dementedly last spring.
Well, of course, Christine, the last 2 summers have been so dry, everyone's lawns are in a bit of a mess. But what particular problems have you got in yours?
Well, when we moved in 3 years ago, the lawn was certainly better than it is now. Now I've got lots of different sorts of weeds. I've got clover and dandelions.
Yeah, dandelions are always one of the worst weeds, I'd say, because they've not only got seed heads which spread the seeds far and wide, but also incredibly difficult to dig out, aren't they? Because they've got that great long taproot, and anything you leave behind will make a new plant. So you've got a good bit of speedwell coming up here as well. That's another one that's really difficult to control because, of course, each little piece of stem when you cut it, can form a new plant. So you've got to be really careful. And if you don't put a grass box on the lawnmower, you actually spread the weed further than you've got it.
Yeah. And I've got moss.
Oh, moss again has moved in on everyone's lawns. I think after the very dry weather, it very quickly colonises bare patches or weak patches in the grass. Daisies too, they're really difficult because they've got such low rosette-forming leaves. Every time you push the lawnmower over them, you don't actually damage the daisy at all, and it sits there and thrives. Buttercups as well. Those too are quite difficult to dig out, aren't they?
Yes. And I've got docks and groundsel and all manner of odd species coming in.
Of course, on an area like this, Christine, where you've only got a few weeds and the basic grass isn't really quite good condition, you may as well use physical control. And of course, many people who don't really want to use chemicals in the garden at all, physical control is the only method. Why don't you have a go with this one? Let's see how we get on. Well, of course, there are always new gadgets coming on the market, which will certainly help to take some of the backache out of weeding. Like this, it's called a weed key, and you simply press it into the ground, right in the centre of the offending weed, give it a couple of turns, and that way you'll actually wrench out all the root system, and you pull out a plug of soil, then just simply ping it away.
And can I compost that weed?
Well, I must admit, Christine, it's not something I ever like to do, because I always think there's a risk that either weed or weed seeds will grow away.
And now you've made me these lovely little holes in my lawn. What can I do with those?
Well, if the holes aren't too bad, then all you can do is tamp down the grass and it'll grow away quite well. But the problem is with something like this, it is actually worth filling it in. You could use sifted garden soil, but if you use a top dressing like this, which has got a high sand content, then by putting that into the holes and firming it down just gently as you do so, you'll have a lovely core of quite sandy soil, and that will act as a good improvement in drainage, and you're less likely to get problems with moss and things in the future. Then once you've firmed that down, if you just put a bit of grass seed over the top, just sprinkle a little bit on, and that will help to give it a helping hand. And then just rough up the surface slightly so that the grass seed gets in good contact with the top dressing, and then it should grow away really well. If it doesn't rain for a day or two, then it's time to get the sprinkler out. But if your lawn's absolutely riddled with weeds, then I'd suggest you use a chemical treatment. There are plenty of products on the market, and they're capable of dealing with a wide range and combination of different problems. But for someone like Christine, I'd suggest using something like this, because it contains a moss killer and a weed killer. But whatever you need for your lawn, always choose a product which contains a fertiliser or feed, because that way you'll ensure that all the replacement grass really grows away strongly.
This dribble bar's really great.
Yeah, and they're really good, Christine, because in fact they come in a range of different lengths, so you can get a small one and even use that for, say, spot treating weeds. It's a much more accurate method of application than something like a watering can, and certainly than a sprayer. Far less problems with drift.
Yeah. And do I have to do it again during the summer?
Well, generally the first application will get rid of almost all the weeds, and the second application will get rid of nearly all of them, but you may be left with one or two stubborn ones.
And are my children going to be safe with this?
Well, again, it depends really on which chemical you use, but as a rule, provided the chemical's dried on the grass, then it's perfectly safe both for children and pets.
And can I compost the clippings when I've done it?
As a rule, you certainly want to discard the clippings from the first few mowings.
Now, Pippa, you're not going to tell me of anything at all I can do with this.
Well, Christine, I must admit, this is what I'd call a case for admitting defeat, and I would be inclined to start again. If you got going now, by the end of this year, you could have a lawn which looked really great.
For the grass is getting greener, the grass is getting greener, the grass is getting greener all the time.
It's amazing how quickly our greenhouse has filled up with plants, considering it was completely empty when we first saw it in March. And a lot of this has been achieved by sowing seed. The bedding plants here will be set outside at the end of May, which will make room for all the colourful pot plants to be spaced out and arranged to give us a lovely display for the summer, to really bring people into the greenhouse to have a look. And to achieve this sort of display throughout the year, you need to be sowing seeds almost constantly, right from spring through summer. For instance, to get plants like these calceolarias and cinerarias this time next year, we'll need to be sowing in June and July. Seeds that need to be sown now include those of primulas, Primula cuensis with lovely yellow flowers, the pot primroses, and this obconica, which is a variety called Salomon. Be careful with Primula obconicas because they have hairy leaves which can be irritant with some people, although I have heard that they're breeding a new one which won't do this. So do take care when you're handling them. So to sow seeds of these, prepare the pot with moist compost before you start, and then very carefully sow the tiny seed over the surface. Now it doesn't need to be covered, so there's no need to go sieving soil over the top. Just press to bring the seed in contact with the compost. Then just brush the dibber off to make sure there's no seed stuck to it. Pop a label in. And these seeds need gentle warmth. They don't want to go under the cover on the propagating bench, just onto the heated bench, so the heat will rise gently through them. And they should germinate within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Of course, we're going to get an awful lot of pricking out to do, and most of it's straightforward, but when you come to very tiny seedlings like these gloxinias, then it can be a little bit tricky. They need warmth to get them going. It's quite feasible to grow them in a cool greenhouse, providing you've got the propagating facilities to start them off. But once they get to this stage, they've used up all the fertiliser in the compost, and they'll just sit there and start going off and damping off if you don't move them on and prick them out now. So prepare a tray of moist compost. And to make life easier for myself, I take a split cane and with my knife just flatten the end and cut a little notch in it. And that means I can lift the seedlings out without having to touch them because they are so tiny, and just push them into the new compost. Placing them quite close together because they are so small. And of course these need to be put back in the propagating case because they need the warmth. And by the time they've grown so that they're almost touching each other, they can be potted into separate pots. And by that time the natural greenhouse temperature will have risen and they can go back into the greenhouse atmosphere. The plants that arrived mail order are doing really well. All sorts of pelargoniums with different leaf colours, and also the fuchsias. But you do need to keep an eye on them because if you want to get nice bushy plants, unless you're growing standards of course, you do need to pinch the tips out, just nipping out the growing points to induce those side shoots to grow up and take over and become nice and round and bushy. Now, there are other ways of getting plants, apart from sowing seeds and receiving plants through the post. You can go around cadging them, of course, off friends who have greenhouses, and this is a great way of expanding your collection. Just go and make big eyes at lovely plants like this New Zealand Christmas tree. Even if the books tell you that you need to propagate shrubby plants in the summer, if you get the opportunity to take cuttings at this time of year, go for it, because they will work. The best thing to look out for on plants like this are nice little side shoots that you can pull off with a little heel attached. Then, with a knife, trim the heel. Just remove about 4 or 5 of those bottom leaves. Into some hormone rooting liquid, and just dibble into the compost, which is 50-50 cocoa fibre and vermiculite. I should be able to get 4 or 5 cuttings in this pot, which of course will need to go to the heated bench to be rooted. If you go to the garden centre for plants, it's worth looking for those that have plenty of non-flowering shoots as well as flowering ones. I found this Cytisus canariensis, which has pretty little pea-like flowers with a delicate perfume, and I'll be able to take softwood cuttings of all these shoots to give me plants for next year. A plant which you won't find in the garden centres very often is one which I'm often being asked the name of, and that is Ledoburia socialis. It would be easy to divide. All you need to do is to loosen it and take it out of its pot, and then take a good handful and prise it away from the main part of the plant, which of course can be replaced into the original pot and the new section planted up into some nice gritty compost. Now, some plants obligingly provide little plantlets on the main part. This one, for instance, Crassula multicollis, which rather unusually produces its plantlets in the actual head of flowers. Sometimes you find kalanchoes do this as well. When these little plantlets become larger and the flowers are almost dying off, that's the time to take them off and grow them on in some fresh compost, almost like pricking out giant seedlings. These are just some of the ways of propagating plants. Don't be afraid to experiment if you haven't tried these methods before, because it's great fun, and the only danger is that you'll actually run out of space in the greenhouse and it will be overflowing.
If you want to get ideas for your garden, now's the time of the year to start visiting some of those beautiful gardens that are open to the public. Some of them, I can tell you, you'll want to go back to time and time again. So last summer, we paid a return visit to see what was going on at Rosemoor.
Nestling at the bottom of a wooded Devon valley, this is one of my favourite gardens, Rosemoor. It was developed by Lady Anne Palmer and holds a huge collection of rare and special plants, a lot of them acquired by her on her frequent plant hunting trips overseas. It's a very personal garden, this, distinctive in design and planting, with beautifully placed groups of trees and shrubs, and of course a surprise round every corner. Well, it's been a real labour of love for Lady Anne, but back in 1988, in a magnanimous gesture, she donated the whole property, lock, stock and barrel, to the Royal Horticultural Society. This has been quite an undertaking for the Society, because as well as taking on the 8 acres of garden here and the house, there's another 32 acres of bare pasture land, and that's all got to be turned into a huge new garden. Well, the transformation is now well underway, and in charge of operations is Rosemoor's director, Major General Jeremy Rougier.
It was quite clear that if we were going to expand the garden from about 10,000 people a year to, we hope, about 100,000, we were going to have to provide better facilities than we had. And so in the last year, we've done a tremendous amount of building. We built a new entrance drive, a new car park to take 80 cars. This lovely new visitor centre here, which has a restaurant in it and a shop and a plant centre. And an underpass which we had to build to link one side of the garden with the other, because there was this huge road that ran through the middle of them. The first phase, which we completed in June 1990, and the whole of the visitor centre and the new gardens opened then, were these 2 huge rose gardens that you see here, with about 2,000 roses in of 200 different varieties. Then also, of course, there's the start of what is going to be about a quarter of a mile of herbaceous border.
It's a mixed herbaceous border. We're extremely pleased with the way that it's got underway. The herbaceous perennials in particular have grown very rapidly and provided a good display this year, but there is also a strong backbone of shrubs interwoven amongst it, which will become obviously more noticeable as the next 2 or 3 years go by. And dividing it from the rose gardens behind will be an 8-foot-high yew hedge. That will, of course, take a considerably longer period of time than the shrubs to actually mature and become what we would wish it to be.
What about the rose garden? That's come into colour very fast.
I've been extremely pleased with the way the roses have got underway. They just went in bare root in April and May, and they have literally gone away like a rocket. The soil here is very good. It's a sort of rather retentive clay-based soil, and the roses certainly have appreciated this season. About the most exciting of all of the plantings we've made in this first year have been the tender perennials in the borders around the visitor centre here.
And how long have they been in?
A mere 8 weeks. It's almost impossible. 8 weeks to this.
Huge.
Yes, they've grown extremely well.
But they are tender, so you won't be able to take them out.
Yes, the bulk of them are tender. We wouldn't expect them necessarily to overwinter very well, but in this part of the country, or perhaps at the foot of a warm wall if you're somewhere away from the mild southwest, you can get surprisingly good survival rates, and the plants are there almost ready to go next April and May.
What about if you live in the northeast?
If you live in the northeast, you do what we do, which is to have belt and braces, and we take cuttings as well. The cuttings are taken any time from now on, overwintered in a greenhouse with about 4 or 5 degrees centigrade. They don't require a great deal of heat. Pot them on about the end of January, early February, and they're virtually in flower when you put them out in mid to late May. The verbenas are remarkably productive. They're extremely floriferous. The colour range goes from pure white. There's a super variety called White Knight. There's a lovely pink called Silver Anne, which is very, very heavily scented.
Yeah, that's quite close to Sissinghurst.
It is indeed. Sissinghurst goes that much closer into magenta. And then from the magenta we come down to real purples. There's a species called elegans, which is quite a strong purple, very different from the other verbenas, which we all know so well.
Well, I noticed that you're using pelargonias, but you haven't gone for the brightly coloured flowers. You've gone more for foliage sorts.
Yes, we've used the scented leaf pelargoniums, and what we're effectively trying to do is perhaps just to tone down the colours here and there. And there are some lovely varieties. There's Pelargonium cross fragrans, which is a super low-growing one, and then there's Grey Lady Plymouth with a grey variegation and a lemon scent. As well as that, there are the old unique varieties, which are a little bit more floriferous, but by the same token, they don't overpower the planting alongside them.
Muted colour.
Very much muted, yes. There are certain plantings which please me a great deal. Just in front of us here, we have Verbena elegans, and above it, Osteospermum crispricae, and somehow the purple and the pinky purple of the Osteospermum, they go extremely well together.
With the silver background of the Artemisia.
Yes, the silver of the Artemisia and the shrubby chrysanthemum on the other side. The whole thing makes a very attractive picture.
Which colour grouping you are especially pleased with? Is there any one that you pick as saying, this I've really succeeded with?
Well, apart from this one, there is one in particular, which doesn't actually use all tender perennials. You'll know the Crocosmia sulphataire,
yes,
with its bronzy purple leaves and yellow flowers, orange yellow flowers. Putting that alongside Osteospermum buttermilk and running in between them the variegated Helichrysum Petiolari variegatum. There's cream, there's yellow, there's bronze, and the whole thing is muted but at the same time full of interest.
What we want to do, particularly in this formal garden area, is to show people what they can and can't do in gardening terms in the climate and conditions you get in the West Country. We certainly don't want to produce a Wisley clone down here. That's far from our mind. The difference is, of course, although we are doing much the same sort of thing, we're doing it in a totally different climate, a totally different environment, and actually in a totally different way. You see, if you start with a greenfield site, you can actually start from first principles. And so although our aims are exactly the same as Wisley, the way we achieve them will be very different indeed. So the thing about what we're doing here is that it's a garden that's on the move. Every year there's something different. Every year there's a new development. Every year, I'm sure, visitors will want to come back and see what we've been up to in the last 12 months.
Yes, you can bet your life they will. And in fact, since we were there last summer, a lot has happened. They built a huge reservoir and a stream garden, and they're now finishing planting the bog garden. And the last little job this month is to plant 7,000 new plants in 700 varieties to make 2 colour theme gardens. Now, they've got to be worth seeing. Rosemore Gardens in North Devon are open every day of the week. Another little job that keeps the RHS busy at this time of the year is the Chelsea Flower Show. Well, Gardeners' World will be there, of course, in May, but if you're not a member and you want to go, then you should apply for your tickets as soon as possible. There are still some available for Thursday the 23rd of May and Friday the 24th. So make sure you apply soon, and certainly before the closing date of May the 10th. There's a special 24-hour Chelsea information line on 071 828 1744 with details of opening times, admission charges and how to pay. It's the high point of the gardener's year, so go if you can. When you're planting a hedge, speed of growth is the name of the game. So it's worthwhile preparing the soil really well. The better you prepare it, the faster your hedge will grow. So the area really needs to be deeply dug with lots of organic matter in it. And when you do, don't just prepare a narrow little trench. If you do that, all the drainage water will seep into it and the roots will rot. Prepare an area at least 1 metre wide, and if you can manage 2 metres, that's ideal. Now, with double digging, the first job is to dig out a trench and then break up the bottom. Now put some organic matter into the bottom of the trench. And then you can start refilling. But you don't only want organic matter just in the bottom. So only refill the trench halfway. And then put some more organic matter on the top of that. And then you can completely refill. Just level it off a bit. And now you're ready for planting. I'm planting yew here, And a plant like this will cost between £4 and £5. Now, you plant them about 18 inches to 2 foot apart, so you can see it's quite an expensive operation. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, it certainly makes the very best hedge in the whole world, and it does have the advantage that it grows out from old wood, so if a bit dies back, you know it's going to regrow. The one disadvantage, apart from the price, is that it's slow growing. A hedge will take, well, up to 5 years, I suppose, before there's anything to look at here. So if it's speed of growth you're after, you need to look elsewhere. And speed of growth was certainly what I needed here. I built myself a beautiful alpine house, but I really messed it up, because just look at the view. My compost and manure area is not the prettiest sight in the world, so I had to screen it with fast-growing Leylandii, Castlewell and Gold. This hedge is about 3 years old, so you can see it's a very fast grower. But unlike you, it doesn't grow out from old wood, so it's essential to prune it when it's reached the width that you require. Otherwise, you'll be cutting back into brown wood. But don't cut the top until it's gone about 3 feet, 2 to 3 feet higher than you want it. And then cut it 6 inches lower than the finished level that you require. And that'll allow side shoots to grow up and hide any ugly cuts and give you a nice flat top. But of course the snag with this hedge is that if you do get any dieback, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So you might prefer to go for Thuja atravirens, which is slightly slower growing but will grow out from old wood. It'll cost you a little bit more, but it makes a wonderful green background to the border. I've got 2 cats who I love dearly. This one's Dennis. They cause me no problems at all, but then, of course, I've got a big garden. We do get hundreds of letters from gardeners who are absolutely plagued with cats, generally somebody else's. And really, I don't know what to advise them. The only thing I do is that I grow a little bit of cat mint, and the cats lie in that, they love it, and they don't damage other plants. But I don't think that's the real solution. If you've got a solution that you know works, do drop us a line on P.O. Box 1066, Birmingham B5 7YD. Mark your envelopes cat calls, and please include a daytime telephone number. Well, next week, Stefan visits an amazing Victorian garden where you can travel as far afield as Egypt and China. Anne's in amongst the exotics too. She's visiting a palmist. Well, if that's what you call somebody with a huge collection of palms. And I'll be starting a 2-part series on how to build and grow in raised beds, as well, of course, as reminding you of all the work you should be doing in the garden next week. Goodbye.